when I started counting the fast food, and that's when it really started hitting home, this problem that we face. When I counted 53 fried chicken restaurants in 3 block radius, 29 pharmacies, and no healthy food options, that's the definition of a food desert. 100% of our children's families are on food stamps. How do you eat healthy on a food stamp budget in an area where there's no healthy food? It's not hard, it's impossible. So that's where the activism comes in. If a child plants it, he will eat it. Guaranteed, write it down. And 8 out of 10 times, they will like what they eat. But then we're back to square one, where do you get it from over here? It was the first year camp. We were next door, all the kids, me. Rain clouds rolling in, you saw the thunder coming. 2 of the kids, 2 sisters, they're of African descent, Senegal. They sublease here, so someone will have a 3-bedroom apartment, they chop it up, and the families have their little portion. They're paying their rent, but that guy wasn't paying his rent to the landlord. We're over there with the kids, starts pouring rain, we're ready to pack up and run for shelter. Here comes the mother with a newborn papoose to her chest, doesn't speak English, just got evicted. Everything she owns in her 2 bags. Her 8-year-old daughter's translating to me. Everybody's hysterical crying. They have nowhere to go. Everything, a newborn baby, and me. That was the first year. Happens more than you think. When we talk homelessness in this city, we think about the guy in the subway talking to himself with 5 coats on. There's 35,000 homeless children in this city, and a third of them are right here in Harlem. I think we are a result of our environment. We have a patch of dirt in the middle of Harlem surrounded by tenements. Okay, we call it a farm, we grow food, yes. We plant seeds in the ground, but more importantly, we're planting seeds in the kids' heads.
If you guys can hold on. Yay! Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for coming to East Harlem, and thank you for coming to our Food Policy for Breakfast seminar series. And I want to welcome you here to Hunter College. My name is Charles Platkin. I'm the director of the New York City Food Policy Center and a professor here at Hunter College. Today's panel discussion is called Everything But the Food, Real Ideas to Fix Real Problems. We're pleased and excited to hear from our expert panelists today, including Shawna Castillo, the Director of Resident Economic Empowerment and Sustainability at NYCHA, Figueroa-Reyes, President of the New York City Community Garden, who just made it, and Tony Hillery, Executive Director and founder of Harlem Grown, and Karen Pearl, President and CEO of God's Love We Deliver. I'd like it to, if you could each just sort of introduce yourself, and start with you.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Shawna Castillo from the New York City Housing Authority. I'm the director of a department that we call REASE for short. Its full name is Resident Economic Empowerment and Sustainability. We are under our Community Engagement and Partnerships Division at the Housing Authority, and really our work is focused around helping to ensure that there are thriving economic opportunities for our public housing residents and our NYCHA Section 8 tenants as well.
Well, good morning and peace and blessings. My name is Ray Figueroa, and I'm very, very grateful to be here, and thank you to the Center for Food Policy. I am president of the New York City Community Garden Coalition. I am director of a youth farm up in the South Bronx known as Brook Park Youth Farm. We run an alternatives to incarceration workforce entrepreneurial initiative through our youth farm. I am involved in 2 community land trust initiatives, which I'll probably refer to later on. And I'm on the faculty of the Graduate Center for Planning and the Environment at Pratt.
Well, good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm Tony Hillery, founder of Harlem Grown. And full disclaimer, I am not an expert I'm just a lucky guy who had some time who started volunteering. So my staff and I together over the last 8 years have discovered that it's not as simple as food or seeds. And our tagline is, yes, we plant fruits and vegetables, but we grow healthy children in sustainable communities, and hopefully we can get into that in this discussion.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Karen Pearl, the President and CEO at God's Love We Deliver. God's Love has been around for about 35 years here in New York City. And what we do is we cook, package, and then home deliver nutritionally based meals that are tailored to our clients who are all living with severe and chronic illness. And we do about 1.8 million meals a year in all 5 boroughs of the city and surrounding counties. And we like to say that food is medicine and that food is love. And we hopefully give great doses of both of those things to all of our clients.
Thank you, everyone. I really, it's really nice to have all of you here, and we really appreciate you coming and giving your time. And this is the second event that's come from actually 2 panelists. The first event was their food and medicine, entire day summit, which, Karen had pushed for, and we ended up doing. And this event came about by a quick sort of discussion when Tony was in the audience and said, this is great, but really. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, it's more than just about food. So I said, why don't we do an event? So he said, absolutely. And then I had to email him 3 times, but he was on it, but he's busy. He's very busy. So, we got together and we recommended panelists and pulled this together in a great way, and we're really excited. So let's start with the title of the event, which is Everything But the Food, and why it's an important concept for our community. And we do talk a lot about food insecurity and rescue food and obesity and diet-related diseases. What about this? What about not just talking about food and the related issues around it?
Okay. And I'm just very happy to be here for that title in particular, because I, like many, probably most of you in the audience, we assume it's as simple as just eat healthy or just give them some food. 8 years ago when this started, it started with me volunteering in an elementary school right here in Harlem, and you're working in an elementary school with children 5 to 11 who can't identify food. They can't tell you vegetables. Now remember, these children are going to school for academics and their 3 meals a day they have in school. They come for school for breakfast, lunch, and then they have a snack they call supper at 4 o'clock before they go home. Ask them to identify what's on their plate. They can't. So to go back to what I started with, give me 100 pounds of chard or kale or cabbage, and 99 pounds will find its way in the garbage if you don't know what it is or how to prepare it and nutritional value. So that's what prompted Harlem Grown, and I'm sure these other panelists will have a similar thing to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. I'm just going to relay something of an informative anecdote based on the work that I do with my Alternatives to Incarceration youth farm focused work. We in the South Bronx represent the poorest urban congressional district in the nation. What does that mean? That means that people are living rent burden, severe rent burden. And according to the New York Fed, that is the central bank, their economists have done a study, as has the U.S. Census Bureau, that rent burden is very closely implicates food insecurity. So, in a place like the South Bronx, what does food insecurity mean? Well, if you're a young person growing up in that, that means that you're getting up and you're not. It's not a given that you're eating. More likely than not, maybe you get one meal, maybe you don't for breakfast, and then you're expected to go to school. And then in school, so that's a structural feature. When you go to school, you have an institutional policy of called zero tolerance policy, discipline policy. And what does that mean? That a young person who arrives, who is hungry, more than likely, you know what happens when you're hungry. What happens when you're hungry? Angry, okay, so they arrive hangry, okay, hungry and angry. And what does that mean? You know, the teacher will perceive who lacks cultural competency as being recalcitrant, being insubordinate, and otherwise it leads to a situation deteriorates rather rapidly into a discipline situation, very heavy-handed, and more often than not, as in the South Bronx, District 7 of the DOE has the highest suspension rate. New York Civil Liberties Union has said, hey, suspension rates lead to incarceration. So just wanted to connect those dots in terms of what's outside of food.
So I would say for me, when I was first invited to join the panel, I was actually redirected and said, well, I think that maybe you'd want to speak with my colleague in health initiatives under our Community Engagement Partnership Division. And under that department, we do have our Farms at NYCHA partnership, where we have now 6 farms on NYCHA campuses, along with our community partners. But really then thought about it more and said, okay, well, what we're doing at Reese is really about securing economic opportunities, really helping to ensure that residents feel more secure, more self-sufficient. And for many residents, this means getting a job that pays a self-sustaining wage, getting access to a career pathway through that initial employment or through going back to school or maybe becoming their own business. And these are all things that we focus on within my department. And I think that really that is what gets to the cure of the food scarcity issue. So one thing is, of course, ensuring that there are not food deserts and we're able to bridge those gaps, and that's incredibly important. But the other piece is just really making sure that people aren't stuck in generational poverty and that there are opportunities to access what will bring them greater income and greater assets for them and their families.
I think that's. I think they come my way. I think that sounds incredible, but I'd like to just get into the specifics and just to go right for it. So, you talked about jobs, and then you talked about food, which is kind of, you know, what we were talking, Tony and I were talking about before this, and what we talked about on the phone. So, what are you doing? You know, not in a mean way, but what are you doing? What is NYCHA doing to impact the outcome? Like to change those dynamics, and is it effective? Is it significantly effective?
Sure. So obviously NYCHA is a landlord. That's core to our mission, but also core to our mission is to connect residents to critical social service, and NYCHA has a long history of doing just that. Within the past 10 years or so, NYCHA really had to shift how it was providing the support to residents. One, because of a shrinking budget, and 2, because we needed to be more effective at providing such service. And so a decade ago, NYCHA was still attempting to provide direct services to residents of need. This means come to our office, let's work on your resume together, let's connect you to a job. NYCHA trying to secure resources for its own high school equivalency programs, etc. And so what we really did is we really said, okay, well, how do we pivot that so that we're able to really serve the entire New York City housing population that wants such services? And so again, we're talking about 400,000 residents that live in public housing. Of course, a good number are seniors and youth, but there are, of course, a good number that are of working age, want to work, and those that are still underemployed. And so we pivoted and we began doing a lot of service coordination work, and it was really about leveraging the resources that already exist in the city, working better and more strategically with our sister city agency partners, and also engaging nonprofits that are both very local in communities and those that have services that expand citywide, and engaging those organizations in a meaningful way, but also ensuring that there was a lot of credibility there with residents. And so we have organizations go through an application process with us, and it's very vetted, and we're looking to pair with organizations that have proven success record. And so to date, we have found a tremendous improvement rate in our efforts to connect residents to opportunities. In January, City Hall released a press release around NYCHA under the de Blasio administration, helping to secure 15,000 resident job placements from the start of the administration to present day. A lot of that are placements that are connecting at NYCHA itself, and I can speak about some of those programs in more detail later on, but they're also about increasing the resources in communities, so some key initiatives such as our Jobs Plus initiatives, which is a various city agency initiative in which we have providers on site that are providing workforce employment assistance and wraparound supports to NYCHA residents.
So when you were talking, I wrote down these things. I wrote down education, health, jobs, home, and food. I'm probably missing a lot. And then this is a question that was emailed to me by one of the panelists. You know, racism, sexism, classism are all factors that determine who's poor and who's hungry in America. And looking at, you know, education, health, jobs, and home, all those impact how and when we eat and how we live, right? So
I'll jump in for a moment. So what I wanted to respond to the more than food question and that, which is I come very much from the lens of illness because that's who we serve, people who are very, very sick. And one of the things that you know about, or that we've learned about people who are sick, is that it is this amazing leveler around all of those different social determinants of health. People who get very sick often, even if they were really gainfully employed, lose their jobs, lose their health insurance, lose access to all of the supports that they had come to rely on, including very often family and friends, and get more and more and more isolated, more and more poor, more and more unable to afford even the very basics of their existence, which is ultimately food. And so for us, we talk a lot about delivering meals because that's what we do, but the truth is the meal is the carrier. Really what we're delivering is nutrition and science and education and helping people understand how to use food to get better if they can, or to maintain themselves if they can't get better. Because it is really, really complex, particularly when you don't feel well, to figure out when to eat with medication or take your medication without food. Or when we say to people, eat healthy, they have no idea what that means. None whatsoever. And so as we look at all of the social determinants of health that really research shows that are 80% valued, 80% of our health is around social determinants, and only 20% is around all that very expensive medical care that we all get, or want to get, or sometimes need to get. So if we could look at fixing that 80%, we will have a much, much healthier society, much, much better health outcomes across all populations. And so I think that really needs to be our goal, is to make sure that, of course, people are stably housed, have access to the right food for their situations, can work, get jobs if they can work. All of those different pieces need to get in place.
So, you know, and again, I've been researching this topic for a while and trying to come up with, you know, what the right questions are. So I'm going to read this actually. There are those that believe that focusing on food insecurity should not be a primary concern, since most of these issues would be fixed if poverty was resolved. Okay. And honestly, you know, these were told to me through whispers, through, you know, various administration executives and things like that. And that's how some people feel. That why bother, okay, to focus on any of these issues if really we should be focusing on the, you know, on income inequity and poverty. And this is just a distraction. Many believe the problems with our food system can only be solved by systematic changes in the way power is distributed. Political change and redistribution of power and wealth is a much more difficult task than donating food, rescuing waste from restaurants, or building gardens. And then I added to this my intellectual brilliance. What do you think?
Well, you know, we all know that the majority of wealth in this country is inherited, right? There's no argument with that. These are facts. Almost all of poverty is inherited. Generational poverty is a cycle. And since that term was coined, I don't know how long ago, generational poverty, we've spent hundreds of billions of dollars trying to eradicate generational poverty. Yet it's worse today than it's ever been before. What does that say? It doesn't work. So what we kind of stumble on here at Harlem Grown, not that we are geniuses or we found the secret formula, but it works for us where we are. The deliverables is everything. Nonprofits are great. They're very important to fill that gap in the society. And myself, I live in Riverdale in the Bronx, yet one day I decided I'm gonna go into Harlem to go save people. I parachuted into Central Harlem to go save people. Listen to that, right? I was there for about 3 weeks until I finally figured out that that's the wrong method. The people that I was going to help, they've been introduced to people just like me since the kids were born. It's a cycle. People are in and out of their lives from the moment they're born. Multiply that with the fact that these kids, from the moment they're old enough to understand words, they're told no, what they can't do, and where they can't go. Think about that. 42% of the children we serve are in transitional housing. All right? The Times did a cover story last year. There's 1.1 million students in New York City schools, where 1 in 10 are homeless. So think about that. And this kid is coming into school to learn. All right, they're coming from a shelter and they're walking in to learn. There are so many other levels before they even walk into that door that this child is trying to encounter. And as Ray said, we know these numbers, right? So instead of the Board of Ed having, no offense on the Board of Ed if anyone's here, but you would think there'd be a team of social workers inside that school to service these children when they come in. There's not, but there is discipline and test preparation. So a kid's coming in hungry, a little agitated, they're suspended or put into the save room at 6 years old. It's like solitary confinement. I mean, these are the systems that, and this is elementary. This is before they get to Ray. Ray is young adults. But these young kids turn into these young adults, and you see this vicious cycle. So how do we break in?
I just wanted to speak to that from my perspective. The New York City Community Garden Coalition, as a result of our work, we bump up against something that's fairly fundamental from a structural analytical perspective, and that is urban planning, municipal urban planning. The history of New York is a history of every municipality in the United States, and that history is one where you have something known as early on in the 20th century, I want to say 1916, exclusionary zoning, 1930s, 40s, redlining. You move through the 40s, through the 50s, you have urban renewal. You have restrictive covenants, block busting, you have something known as benign neglect, and you have something called planned shrinkage. All of that were explicitly intentional racist policies to relegate primarily black people and brown to a position to carry the disproportionate burden of poverty. This is an explicit policy. Dr. Mindy Fullilove, a preeminent scholar in the field of urban planning and the health ramifications of such, has said that the history of urban planning is has been the primary tool for oppression in the 21st century, in the 20th and 21st century. The primary instrument of oppression. What does that mean? Poverty really undermines. So I'm building on Tony's point about generational poverty. It's not just inherited. It was something that was actually planned. When one really looks at that, one has to really consider, well, what does poverty do? What does enforced structural unemployment do? It undermines one's sense of self-determination. So, from our perspective in the community gardens field, community gardens serve as vehicles for community-driven self-determination, which is the absolute very beginning of addressing poverty, right? Poverty is not purely economic per se. It is the ability of not being, or the lack thereof, of being able to be productively engaged in a way that is self-determining and in a way that honors one's a community sense of human dignity. So just wanted to put that out there. We're not dealing with anything coincidental. And so that means that it's a very political, that analysis suggests that the solutions are very, very political. And we are engaged in as much, and I'm sure that we'll have an opportunity to elaborate on that.
Well, how about right now?
Oh,
No, because I think this is
Okay.
really important here, because
Okay.
I look at this and I think, I try to intellectualize and I say, okay, if we go too far left,
so
we're
let
a
me
whole country, right?
So let me jump on that. What we have structurally, I'm so grateful. I'm a product of Cornell University Africana Studies and College of Human Ecology, and I had a professor who really taught me, this thing called structural analysis. The seminal work was that we used as a text was Political Economy of the Urban Ghetto. Anyway, so let's do a structural analysis of power. Power analysis, right? Elected officials are term limited. What does that mean? They are that term limited character of their tenure in office does not lend itself to dealing with long-term, deeply rooted issues. So it drives policy in a way where we're just looking at treating the problem, specifically treating the symptoms, because that's something that elected officials can say, hey, I did something, and primarily services, but really not getting at the root. And so that's an issue. What we need to do, for example, you have some elected officials now up in Albany and certainly in Congress, AOC, Green New Deal. These are very, very bold initiatives, policy initiatives around getting at the root issue, notwithstanding that, she may be term limited. So that's a problem. So, how do we wrap our heads around that? The other one is direct balloting. And direct balloting has worked in Baltimore, specifically in terms of a historically marginalized community, African-American community, in terms of the community taking ownership over its destiny.
So, and I heard all the things you're saying, but I guess when I hear all that, I think, okay, what about those other people, that don't want, wages to go up? I mean, the balance doesn't work, meaning, you have people that are diametrically opposed to some of these concepts, and then basically you get a stalemate. So I guess what I'm looking and thinking about is what are suggestions that'll work right here, right now, and and how do we solve some of these issues that we talk about all the time? And we've had 45 food policy for breakfast seminars. I've attended hundreds of events. And I always look to think, okay, well, what can we learn out of this whole process? And what is it that if we were sending a message to the potentially new mayor, the new administration, what is it that what are some of these policies that we can institute that would stick? And not everybody would be happy, but we'd have a more livable city.
Well, I'll speak to that again from the perspective of God's love, which is we're working really, really hard to change healthcare policy and healthcare law to make sure that medically tailored meals are a reimbursable expense that health plans will pay for. Because one thing we all know, this is all scientifically based, it's been researched, it's been published, that people who have access to medically tailored meals who are dealing with severe and chronic illness just do better. Their health outcomes improve and they cost the system less money. It's a complete win. It's a win for the person. They go home after the hospital rather than to nursing homes and rehab centers. The system saves 24%. That's a lot of money in healthcare. And any one thing that could save 24% is a lot of money, and people should be jumping up and down and saying yes. So if we were able to change health policy to reimburse for medically tailored meals, people would do better, the system would save money. That is, just from a policy perspective, a complete across-the-board win. And I think that there are similar kinds of things in all of the social determinants of health. I don't know them as well, because that's not my business, My business is food and nutrition. But I think if we are able to do that, and we are doing that, we're working on that in Albany, we're working on that in federal government, because it's just, it makes no sense not to do it. You get back more in savings than it costs. And that is, again, what we should all be trying to get from a policy perspective.
Yeah, yes and no, and I don't mean to disagree, but I don't think the 24% or whatever percentage in cost savings is relevant to the larger conversation, because in communities that we're talking about, like for instance where we have our first farm, little patch of dirt about as big as this room, we have 55 fast food restaurants in a 3-block radius, but we also have 29 pharmacies. Okay, I think this is all profit driven. So 25% of what? You see how they gouge on the prices of this, on the medicines and all
absolutely,
this stuff.
I don't disagree with that.
I think this is part of the larger picture of this whole economic driver of poverty, because 98% of the children we serve are on food stamps or some government assistance. So they're not paying for this medicine. We're paying for this medicine. They're going in, they're eating this bad food, they're getting sick, they're going right next door to the pharmacy and they're picking up that pill that's probably $80 for today.
Yeah.
And this is...
I agree, and I think, this is a big ball of yarn, and if we keep unraveling it, we can talk about what we grow as a country, what we feed people as we are contributing to the problems we're trying to solve. There's no question. I don't think anybody here on this panel is necessarily contributing, but we, the country. And so there are lots of different policy changes that must happen, starting with access to good, healthy food for everybody that doesn't cost $4 for a pepper. Like, that's a crazy thing. I sit with some people from time to time and they say, well, why doesn't everybody eat healthy? Right, because they can't get access and they can't afford it, right? So, this big ball of yarn that we unravel, but if we, start doing real food for everybody, not all, corn-based food and not all preservatives and additives and all those things that go into what we first feed people, all of the diet-related illness would fall tremendously, and that would be enormously helpful, and we advocate for that too, and I imagine many people in this room advocate for that because, our food supply really needs attention.
But I guess pulling back further, and the theory would be that, if you focus on jobs, education, higher minimum wage, income equality, that there will be less of these kinds of problems instantaneously. Do you agree with that?
Instantaneously?
Well, not instantaneously, you're going to get all those things, but once that happens, you will have, a more level playing field when it comes to healthy food access and eating better and better outcomes medically and so forth.
This is everything but the food. That's the name of this panel, right? Right. Okay. Everyone here knows about mass incarceration, right? That's part of the reason why 80% of our kids live in single-parent households. Everyone here knows about over-policing in certain neighborhoods, right? Guys in our community get picked up for anything you can imagine. And does everybody in this room realize that you can get arrested for not having identification on you? It's a vagrancy law. They can hold you for 2 days while they run your prints to see if there's any warrants on you. These are what these guys get arrested for, yet they have a record now. They have an arrest on their record. What kind of quote-unquote job are these guys going to get? Let's be frank with that. What are they going to do? Go work at McDonald's? Who wants to work at McDonald's? And if they do work at McDonald's, and not disparaging McDonald's or any honest day's work, they got to work in Midtown. They got to pay $5.50 a day just to get to and from work to make minimum wage. Come on, man. Come on. We have to make meaningful jobs, and we have to have living wage. I bristle at the term living wage because my staff was always correcting me on that, but fair wage jobs, access to health care, and a sense of purpose. That goes a long way in any community in this country.
I just wanted to build on that. The two points of information, what the USDA is doing and what New York City is doing. Where I work, and I just described the scenario in the South Bronx, the mayor is looking to build a prison just down the street from our urban farm, right? We already have a youth prison. We already have the highest suspension rates. This is quintessentially a continual iteration of the school-to-prison pipeline. That's the city. You really have to think about that. Dewey, famous education thinker, said, education is about expectations for society, where people are expected to wind up in society. Well, that's a very, very low expectation. The USDA has a budget line. It's called rural development. I don't know if you know about the rural development, but it's about promoting economic development in rural areas. Think Progress did an article not too long ago. You know what's happening in upstate New York? USDA, the New York State is taking USDA money for rural development and building a prison. Okay, so this is like super, like really, really ironic. But this is, again, going at the intentional, explicit policies that are being made to really oppress, and by oppression I mean maintaining the disproportionate burden of unemployment and poverty, a la vicious cycle that Tony was just alluding to. Yes, what we do at Brook Park, we, along with the employment we do have a handle and a sense of vision that yes, we have to do workforce. We have to create income generating activities. And I can tell you, a lot of the young adults have come through the criminal justice system as a result of being involved in the underground economy, right? Selling drugs, running guns, and on and on and on. And guess what workforce development does? Guess what being able to earn income such as they do at the Brook Park, it cools that out. It is as much an alternative to desperation as it is an alternative to incarceration. So, we really have to, wrap our heads around the criminalization of youth and poverty and hunger, and really look to break this vicious cycle. To incarcerate a young person in New York State is 10 times the money that is used to educate. So we're really pushing, those of us, education, not incarceration, because of what this means in terms of where one winds up in the economic workforce arena.
So, thank you. So Shanna, in terms of the programming that you're doing, is there resistance to it? Is it well supported? Do you think it should be expanded?
Yeah, so what I would say is always you can only do as much as you have resources for, have funding for, etc. And so when we look at some of the programs that exist, whether they're connected with NYCHA or not, I think it's important to think about the philanthropic partners that are involved and how much they are willing to invest in for whatever return of investment they're looking for. What we have seen with some pilots that we have run when we've had financial support is that when we provide Metro cards, when we provide food, then we have greater retention, we have greater outcomes. But these are not things that are typically funded. They are almost never funded. We have a few of our youth development focused nonprofit partners that are able to provide stipends to the young adults who do their training, but that is usually not the case. And so when an individual commits and applies for, and usually it's a thorough application process into a training program, even an entrepreneurship program, then they have to sustain themselves throughout the duration of that program, which can be anywhere from 4 weeks to several months. It really depends. And so I think something important to consider is really just the investment that is made, whether it's by public funding or private funding, that can also include the additional support that low-income New Yorkers will need in order to commute, in order to have clarity of mind, so they have a full stomach so that they're able to concentrate and they're able to be more successful. So I just wanted to say that because I think that connects to the other panelists' points. At the New York City Housing Authority, we have a very unique position because a lot of the funding that we'll receive from the federal government does have a mandate for local hire. And we really work to use that to the advantage of our residents. And so we have developed training programs throughout the year. We have currently the NYCHA Resident Training Academy, which is 9 years old and receives support from the Robin Hood Foundation. This support goes directly to our training partners, and it trains residents for employment-linked training, which is a really special type of vocational training because it means that you've identified your employers up front, and you've also customize your curriculum so that it's meeting the industry and the employer's needs. We've had a variety of training tracks throughout the 9 years based on employment opportunities that exist either at the Housing Authority directly or with our contractors. And this would include mostly construction contracted work. And as a result, over the years, we have seen individuals who enter in at an entry-level caretaker position at the Housing Authority, and now 7, 8 years out, they have been promoted 2-3 times. So they're supervisors of caretakers, they're housing managers, they're superintendents. So it is like a really unique pipeline for individuals to become successful in city employment, which is still very attractive to many folks because of, although the pension isn't as great as it used to be, there's still pension, which doesn't exist in most private employment, and there are career ladder opportunities, which mostly happen through then not only promotions in-house, but also taking civil service exams where you can continue with that agency or transfer to another city agency. So I would say that we have seen success there, and that really does make a distinction between helping someone secure a retail job, which there is nothing wrong with that, and now with the minimum wage increase of $15 an hour, it's a bit better off for those workers, and so I'm not knocking that down at all. But when we're able to create strategic partnerships that are bringing employers to the table, where we can see the pipeline of the career trajectory for residents, then residents are able to more easily commit to that process. They're motivated, they see that pipeline to opportunity, and within whatever time frame, they're able to really then make gains on their income and their other benefits, which are incredibly important.
Thank you. That was really interesting, especially about the job creation, how it connects to those partnerships. So, and I know the scenario that I'm creating is strange, but if you had a moment to talk to the next mayor, and they were going to take 80% of what you said and do it, but you only had a couple of minutes, what would you focus on? What would you, and remember they're politicians, so they're only listening with half an ear, because they're focusing on other things. So you have part of their attention, but they're going to listen to what you say. Tony, what would you tell them to do?
Invest less in programs and more in people.
So, and how do you do that?
If you invest in people and you take away all of the, just to touch on what Shawna said, we're part of Farms at NYCHA, Harlem Grown. We run the Wagner Farms right just east of here. They put out all these tens of millions of dollars for a program, yet they don't fund for someone to get to and from work. So what we're doing is letting this kid jump a turnstile to get to work, wind up in jail. You know what I mean? These are all the things that our families and our people face.
So do you think there's a lot of that? Because I think that's silly. Like
it is silly. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, they give, I know they give high school students, public school students Metro cards. So you're saying that even something as small as that, which seems like a small thing.
We look at programs and everything has a little bucket of a program. A person doesn't fit in a bucket, that's a person. They need help from getting up in the morning till they go to bed at night. You can't ignore that. We can't just say, okay, I have this wonderful program here, it starts at 11 o'clock, you just gotta be here. What about before 11 o'clock? And this is what we kind of face here at Harlem Grown. We see these children every day from like 7:15 in the morning, and we're there until almost 5, 6 o'clock at night. And you see the change. You see the change. And investing in people, we have employees that we've seen totally dependent and now totally independent in the span of less than a year. You can see it if you invest in people.
And I've seen some of the staff that you've kind of, I don't know, I can't say the word grown, but that you've nurtured, yeah. And how do you transfer that into a larger scale?
I don't know. I wish I had an easy answer. We all get stuck on data and all of this data gathering and whatnot, and we don't do that here because we do invest in the people, and we're here for the people every day, and we try to support them because all I can speak to was in the space that we're working in, right here in Central Harlem. If you give the majority of the people that we work with a quote-unquote job, they're gonna fail. You have to give them support through this job, on the job and off the job. It's a wraparound, it's everything. It's not just a job. So I wish I had an easy answer. Maybe Ray can touch on that.
Community land trusts, right? Community land trusts really go at something that approximates reparations, right? We cannot, given the analysis that I, am engaged in, that nothing short of something where the community has ownership and control of fundamental productive resources is anything short of that is not going to allow us to get beyond the issues that we're getting at. We have begun having these very productive discussions with the Speaker's office. So we're looking at community gardens, we're looking at housing, we're looking at green infrastructure, types of jobs, employment, which in a coastal town like New York City that is its built environment is particularly vulnerable to extreme weather events. The growing of food at a hyper-local level, the management of water, stormwater, and on and on and on in terms of ecosystem services becomes particularly a poignant matter. So we're making the case. We are consulting with HPD as we speak. We are part of a group of 10 community groups. When I say we, New York City Community Garden Coalition and a couple of community-based organizations in the South Bronx, South Bronx Unite, and Nos Quedamos. Translate, we're staying, we're not going anywhere. That's the name of the Community Development Corporation. So we're consultants to HPD. We're consulting actively with the Speaker's office around community land trust because of what it means in terms of how the community can develop not just the housing affordability, but the food affordability in terms of urban farming and developing a food-based, full value chain, food-based economy.
Karen, what are you telling them there?
I would, kind of building on what Tony said, what you said, you used the word wraparound services, and that really resonated with me. God's Love, we got our start serving people with HIV in the 80s, and that was really our history. And what really changed for people living with HIV was when the Ryan White Care Act got approved in Congress and created a wraparound service. So people got medical care, they got medications, they got housing, food, transportation, legal services, a whole series of wraparound supports that enabled people living with this very, very difficult disease to get access to the different things in their lives that they needed at different times to sustain themselves and to move forward. And so that has kind of been one of the guidelines for us now that we do all illnesses. But that whole concept of supporting the whole person, people aren't just a job or a medication or a need to get to the doctor, or they are very complex, and our needs are very, very complex. And for us, obviously, dealing with the people who are already sick, that gets magnified when you're really sick. But it's true throughout the whole lifespan. People are complex and they need services that support them in that full picture around making sure that we create opportunities that don't put people into particular buckets, but that look at the whole person and make sure that the interventions that we might make available or the opportunities that we might make available are really very much across their lives and give them the right opportunities at the right moments in those many different places.
I noticed that education hasn't been brought up a lot. Is there a reason, or just hasn't been on people's minds, or?
time do we have?
Yeah.
I see my partner, Pam Cook, over here from Teachers College. I met her 8 years ago when I started this wild ride. And we were working in a school where, oh God, it was beyond bizarre. It was something my children went to private school, so I wasn't aware of the conditions of some public schools. And it was crazy is the word to just sum it up. It was just nuts from the top down, and the kids, and every kid was high need, at risk, and it was just like warehousing these children for the day. It was like a babysitter, and the kids aren't learning, they're not eating, they're not getting service, and that's kind of what prompted Harlem Grow in the first place, this one school. And I thought the one school was an outlier. I thought it was just the one school, and they're more common than you would like to imagine. And they are all in areas of color. They are all underfunded. They're all just put in their little areas and forgotten about, and they're fending for themselves. And that was the catalyst for Harlem Grown. So at Harlem Grown, we just don't focus on the food is our mission. That is our focus, but it's everything else but the food. We leverage all of our corporate partners to come into these schools and provide services because these schools have no funding. There is no extracurricular activity. There's no art. Some schools have no music. Some schools don't even have gym. Can you imagine an elementary school kid? It's nuts. So this is our approach to it, but education is everything. If a child doesn't know what the food on their plate is, they're not going to eat it. We didn't. When our parents gave us whatever this green thing was, I mean, honestly, did you eat it? No, we didn't eat it, so we expect these other children to do it? No. So education is everything, and that's our focus. We focus on elementary school children because they're very moldable. 5 to 11 is a very good, easy age. A little difficult sometimes, but it's very good if you're trying to change habits and healthy habits, and that's what we instill every day at work.
Community-based alternatives to incarceration is realizing outcomes of consequence in terms of recidivism, lowering compared to actual incarceration. Community-based alternatives to incarceration is doing that for pennies on the municipal dollar. Those dollars that are saved are in the millions. Just in my site, and I'm talking about maybe a couple of dozen young people, young adults, in terms of cost savings. That money can be taken and reinvested in education in a proactive way to really begin to bring that balance to education instead of incarceration. Right now, as I alluded to earlier, it's whacked out, you know, and we need to reassert our values as a society in terms of honoring every human being's right to an education. It's in the state constitution of New York, actually, not in the federal constitution, but the state constitution of New York says that every individual has a right to education. And so, you know, we want to change that school to prison pipeline from having a right to being incarcerated to having a right to being educated. And why not take what we're doing, the millions of dollars that we're saving, and that's just one site. You know, if we could multiply that, if you could extrapolate that across multiple community-based alternatives to incarceration sites, we would have money for education to do the kind of really meaningful human capital development work.
Sure. So at Reese, we're focused on 18 plus. And so we do have a network of adult education partners that are both private and part of the CUNY system. What we are seeing is that when we do an initiative that is around employment, that's around entrepreneurship, we get tons of interest. When we do something that's exclusively around adult education, we don't get as much interest, and the retention greatly suffers. So we found that it's difficult for adults to focus on going to get their high school diploma when they're adults. They probably have children. They may be grandparents taking care of and the primary guardian of their grandchildren. So they really need to focus on work. And then there's also maybe trauma that they experience in the public education system, and just not being very nervous around failure of even going into school again. And so what we have seen is that when you mix your vocational training with your high school equivalency, then you can really contextualize that learning, and you really are providing that motivation for now this adult who needs the credential in order to obtain a certain job, and also, obtain the learning that will help them to be a better success in that job. But what they're really trying to get is that employment. So if you're able to have a program where you're mixing this certificate, this vocational training certificate, along with your high school equivalency, then that's a model to pursue. What we have seen is successful is when we sort of pivot our construction training, for example, into apprenticeships through unions. That's quite interesting because we have a construction training track. There's some math in there, there's some reading, and you can get off of at the end of that program and you can get a job in construction. What we've been really doing, and we've received our approval from New York State as a direct entry partner, we have a number of union relationships, is really get these individuals who are all Black and brown, men and women, 18 plus, into the trades. And when we're able to do that, then many of these trades also have schooling as part of their apprenticeship program. So IBEW Local 3 electrician is an example of that, where once you get into that program, you're an apprentice, but then you actually have no requirement for schooling, but you also receive the support through the union to do so. And so we have a number of residents now that are doing that, where they're working as electrician apprentices. They're also going to school a couple of nights a week, and at the end of their apprenticeship program, they're going to be a journey person making incredible wage, receiving those union benefits, and also have at least an associate's degree.
Yeah, I would just say that I spent over half of my career in education settings, starting as a preschool teacher, doing adult and youth, out-of-school youth literacy programs, and then for a long time at community college setting. And there is nothing more important than quality education. So that starts with quality, to your point. But I would also come back to the theme about supporting the whole person, because even quality education doesn't work if people can't focus and learn from it. And so that's where we get to when you're dealing with community college students. People need access to good childcare so that they can come to school, they can pay attention, not worry about their kids. When they're in preschool, they need food, they need to be able to be stably housed so they're not worrying about that. Education is, to me, the gold standard of building futures. And at the same time, it doesn't stand on its own. It's got to have quality in the classroom and in the education experience, and then everything that supports the person to be able to benefit from that. And I think when we forget about education, and I didn't mean at all to forget about it. There's nothing more fundamental in my way of thinking. But it is all connected to these other things that we've been talking about, and we've got to look at people in terms of being able to benefit from that very rich experience that unfortunately a lot of people don't get in schools. But we've got to work on that as a basic, but on top of that, work on the other things that surround the person, even in the quality environment.
Thank you.
I would just add, just very quickly, in terms of the money being saved as a result of the returns to scale on a community-based alternatives to incarceration, and I said take those millions of dollars and put them in education. Why not take those millions of dollars and get more of the wraparound supportive services, that is to say guidance counselors, right now in the schools, particularly up in the South Bronx and similarly situated communities, Brownsville, wherever, we have more police personnel, more police in the schools than we do guidance counselors. Because that's not going to produce the kinds of outcomes in terms of individuals having their personal growth and development nurtured, much less their human capital developed. So, take these monies, and this is not pie in the sky stuff. This, again, going back to the issue of economic justice, of going back to the issue of social justice, there's an issue of fiscal equity or the lack thereof. And so this would be addressing fiscal inequity in terms of, the imbalance of more police than there are guidance counselors and support services.
So, these are all, like when I listen to this, I'm frustrated, and I think, oh, this is overwhelming. And then I think, okay, well, what is the resistance to some of these ideas? They're great. So and I think, well, some of these things are great. Is it just all money? Is it just all budget money? Or is it that the people don't believe the same things that you're talking about? What is it?
Money and complacency. I think we're getting, we do this every day, and at a certain point you just get numb. I mean, we all read the news. It's too much. It's too much. And I don't know, it's just a very difficult subject. I really think that if we took a step back and just really, once again, focus on the people. Because I tell you, every day, I have staff here, they can tell you, every day you question why we do this work. It's like shoveling against the tide. You're like, what's the point? But then you always get reminded every single day of why you do this work. It could be one, it could be two, whatever, but every day you're reminded.
Right.
So that's our fuel to keep going.
And it's funny because when I talked to you before the event, I was like, oh, I like this. This is great. We got it. And now, I don't feel that way. But anyway, I'd like to open it up for questions.
While you're getting the question, just wanted to say that, Charles, I'm wondering who you're talking with. You're not talking enough to the community. I can tell you right now, where we run our programs, and I'm sure anybody that's locally based, there is such a sense of community efficacy, of embracing what we're doing. No, Tony? I mean, there's love. In our immediate area, there is a ripple, something rippling out into the community. We've actually, in our program, have done gang mediation, something the police could never do, something that they can't do in Rikers Island. We've actually kept young people, young adults alive, right? And that means an entire community. That means other street organization leaders, shot callers, big homies, coming together saying, hey, we're trying to do something in our community. There's a great, a community that is in suffering is like, our ancestors who were on the slave plantation. Great sense. There was no super resignation for the most part. No, there was solidarity, particularly around the children, right? And so, where families were separated, there was the extended family that came into play, and there's a great sense of solidarity at the street community level. When people see, hey, that you're there and you're not going anywhere, which is part of the nonprofit industrial complex, there's some of us that are not going anywhere.
Right.
And once you are a part of the community, this is how we begin to build community. And it does take an investment over time, but really that investment is informed by love.
Yeah,
and so there's a tremendous feeling, and that's where it has to start. So folks are embracing community land trust. Yeah, we got to control this land. We have to own this land and own this land and control this land so that we can stop some of the stuff that's hitting us.
And maybe that's what I felt when we were talking, Tony, that sense of community, before this, and I felt so. And then when we started expanding all these issues, and maybe that's where it is. Maybe it all needs to land down in the communities. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sandra Maria. I am from Public Health Solutions. So I wanted to make more of a comment, I guess, than a question. I think the idea of addressing the individual is actually extremely important. And because all of us work in different fields and we are expert in different areas of the social determinants of health as we were talking about. So I think the idea of collective impact is very important. The idea is that we all do different things, but we can meet on a platform where we are providing the services that individual needs. Each one of us know how to do one thing, but collectively we know how to do everything. And I think that's where it has to start. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Great statement.
I was going to say, I appreciate that very much, and to Charles' despair earlier, I was going to say, why doesn't it happen? It's because it requires a different way of working, where there is the collaboration across all those different experts. And in general, Tony said people don't go into buckets. Well, professionals tend to operate out of buckets. And so it's kind of changing how we integrate around a person that really, I think, has the greatest lift.
And I just got to add one thing. I just want to piggyback on what Ray said. It's about the nonprofit industrial complex. Okay, I'm not a nonprofit professional. I'm just a guy who started this thing 8 years ago. But doing this for 8 years, you see exactly what he's talking about. They all start with an idea and a passion, and that's what drives you. But give it a year or two, and it turns to fundraising. Your whole purpose of being is fundraising. That's not why we get up in the morning, and that's not how we operate. We're a 501c3, but we don't operate like a charity. This is not, oh, please support the poor little black and brown kids. It's not that. But when you try to collaborate with other nonprofits, you have to see these walls going up about, I'm trying to encroach on your funding, or let's write a grant together. Oh, no, man, it always goes to that instead of the mission. And I think us as nonprofit professionals, we really need to take a really good look at ourselves and how we provide these services. Are we really there to do the work, or are we there to raise money?
Thank you. My name is Clara. I work for a food recovery organization called Rescuing Leftover Cuisine. And we are at that juncture, Tony, that you're referencing right now. We're looking to scale, but we want to do it responsibly and make sure that we stay true to our mission. So my question for you all, along this theme of supporting individuals, is if you have any strategies for growing when you find something that works. So when you find a way to support someone as a whole person, how do you expand? And maybe even bringing up the question, is that a good idea? Is reaching a certain scale maybe creating a scenario where you're no longer in a position to help individuals? And if you have scaled successfully, how have you done it?
Well, for us, you invest in that community that you're serving. The people that you're hiring from that community, groom them to be your boss. Empower them to be your boss. And they will stay, and they will tell their friends, and they will come in, and that's how you build resilient communities. You have to be in the community to do that. Remember my story. I parachuted into Central Harlem, and I airlifted out at the end of the day, yet I'm coming to change the community? Come on. The people that we're serving, they expect that from you. But when you're there every day, and then you start empowering them, giving them fair wages and the tools to be better and be more, you'll be surprised at the results. Don't think about scaling as much as you think about the people that you're serving.
Hi, my name is Anna. I'm a clinical dietitian, and thank you for God's Love We Deliver. We have patients and clients who are using your services, and I live in Harlem, so I want to collaborate and learn more about Harlem Grown. And I work in the South Bronx, so I hit a bunch of you. But my question was, are there city officials who are, on our side, who are working towards legislation changes or, broader changes within the city that we can see some of these wraparound supports?
I just want to mention 3 names. Rafael Espinal originally started with one of those brilliant ideas around urban agriculture plan and did an intro bill into city council. Hundreds of us came out, and the way the bill was crafted and drafted did not reflect community input. He heard huge blowback. Much to Councilman Espinal's credit, he listened and he heard. We talked about community farming as opposed to urban farming, community agriculture as opposed to urban agriculture, which really was deferring a lot to what we call ag tech and really super capital intensive agriculture initiatives which really favor privileged classes of individuals who can then leverage resources. So it was really dislocating of the community that has been dedicated for decades in terms of urban agriculture. Much to his credit, Espinal is now, Councilman Espinal now is introducing legislation that there shall be a moratorium on real estate development wherever there are community gardens, right? So, you know, and he spoke with me, and this was over the course of a year and a half, couple of years, and he has said, you know, I've learned by listening to the community. So that's one. Directly out of the mayor's office, Barbara Turk. Okay, she is all that and then some. And then what I mentioned to and referred to earlier, we're in conversations now with the Speaker's office directly on community land trust. We're really trying to figure out this urban agricultural thing, and we have brought up, hey, we can get a win-win. We can do housing because we've been pitted. That is to say, it's been a false dichotomy from a policy perspective that community gardens are in the way of affordable housing. Listen, there's nobody more in favor of affordable housing than community gardeners, because so many community gardeners are growing food because they're food insecure. They understand and the real housing crisis is being rent burdened and being homeless. That's the real housing crisis, and we do have community gardens in the majority that do appreciate that. So we're really talking about a win-win, and that's the real challenge for our elected officials. That is to say, to raise the bar to a win-win. Okay, we oftentimes it is I call it mediocre policy making when we're saying, oh well, you know, we're going to have to take this or we're going to have to lose out maybe next time. I was going to say something, you know, but let's just say, you know, we have to raise the bar and hold our elected officials accountable to a very high bar of promoting the public good. When you promote the public good, that doesn't mean winners and losers. That means everybody is being respected and honored, and we just have to work a little harder, a lot harder in some cases, in order to realize that win-win.
Thank you. We're going to end on that great note. Shanna, Ray, Tony, Karen, thank you so much for a fascinating talk and discussion. I mean, you guys are really incredible. I knew it would be a great group. Please make sure to check out nycfoodpolicy.org. We have 2 to 3 articles every week in our news digest. Also, an incredibly exciting next food event is Tuesday morning, March 12th, which is we have GMO scientists that are coming in and ethicists, and I think it's going to be a very fascinating discussion. These are the top people in the world on GMOs. And then on April 9th, 4 of the 5 borough presidents will be here. So that's 4 of the 5 borough presidents will be here. Sorry, not Queens, but everything but Queens will be here. And they're going to be talking about what the next mayor should consider in terms of food and some of these issues that were discussed today. So I urge you all to be here for that specifically. That's going to be on April 9th. Thank you so much for coming today, and thank our guests for coming. Also on the way out, the TISH report is in.